project unit is 3.16, solved by completing the square. Completing the square is a method to solve quadratic equations in standard form. Our first method will be using the box method. The box method is one of two ways to solve by completing the square. Our first problem is x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Our first step is to draw your box and separate it into 4 sections. We're then going to separate our equation into each of the 4 boxes. The first thing that we do is take our x squared and put it in this bottom left corner. We then separate our 4x into 2x and 2x in the boxes directly next to it. Because this is actually 2 x's, you take 1x and put it on each side of its box. Then you take the 2x and only take the constant out and put it on the outside. To finish completing our square, we're going to multiply these outside constants to get the number 4. Because we have this x and 2 both outside of the square, they act as a binomial and are positive. Since we have 2 of these, they end up to be x plus 2 squared. But we still need to find our k. To find our k, we do 4, which is from here, plus k equals negative 1, which was in our equation. To find k, all we have to do is solve this. So we simply do minus 4, which gives us k equals negative 5. Now that that's k, we move over here, put negative 5, and make this all equal 0. Our next step is to add 5 to both sides. We then get x plus 2 squared equals 5. After this, we have to square root each side, which now gives us, because this is actually squared, it simplifies to x plus 2 equals plus or minus square root of 5. You have to do the plus or minus because we're square rooting with the variable. Our final step is to subtract this 2 from both sides, which gives us x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of 5. You can't subtract the 2 from the 5 because it's under the square root and you can't touch anything under the square root. This gives us our final answer of x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of 5. Our second problem is x squared plus 10x plus 24 equals 0. Again, our first step is to draw our box and separate it into 4 sections. We then take our x squared and put it in the bottom left and split our 10x evenly into the 2 boxes directly next to it. Because this is 2 x's again, we put an x on the outside of it on each side. We then take the constants from our regular x's and put them on the outside as well. Because these are both outside of the square, we put parentheses around them and they're positive and act as a binomial. This then gives us x plus 5, and it's squared because we have 2 of them. But we still need to find our k. To find our k, we take this 25 from our top right corner and add it to k to equal 24, which we get from our equation over here. To find k, all we have to do is solve this simple equation. So we simply subtract 25 from both sides, which gives us k equals negative 1. Now we go over here and put our negative 1 and set this all equal to 0. Our next step is to add this 1 to both sides. This then gives us x plus 5 in parentheses squared equals 1. I have to square root each side, and the reason we do this is to get rid of the second x plus 5. This then gives us x plus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 1. Again, we have to do that plus or minus because we're square rooting a variable. The final step is to subtract this 5 from both sides to make x by itself, which then gives us x equals negative 5 plus or minus square root of 1. The square root of 1 is actually just 1, so we now have x equals negative 5 plus or minus 1. This actually separates into 2 equations, which gives us x equals negative 5 plus 1 and x equals negative 5 minus 1. The answer to this one is just x equals negative 4. And the answer to this one is x equals negative 6. These are our final answers.
Our next method for solve by completing the square is algebraically. And our first equation is x squared plus 6x plus 17 equals 0. Our first step is to separate the constants. So we would do that by subtracting 17 from both sides. Then your new equation would be x squared plus 6x equals negative 17. So our next step is to solve for c, and we're going to do that by doing b divided by 2 and then squaring it. So 6 is our b, so we're going to solve for c by doing b divided by 2 and then squaring it. So we do 6 divided by 2 and squaring it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then 3 squared is 9. So 9 is our new number, and we're going to take this and add it to both sides of the equation. So then that would then give us x squared plus 6x plus 9, which is our new number, equals negative 17 plus 9. And then this would simplify and you would get negative 8. Now we're going to factor the perfect squared trinomial. And we're going to do that by doing x plus b divided by 2 and then squared. So we're going to do x plus b, which is 6 again. So b squared, so 6 divided by 2 is 3. So x plus 3, and then we're going to square it. Then you set this equal to negative 8, which was the sum of these two numbers. Now we're going to solve for x by using the square root method. So we're going to square the x plus 3 squared, and then we're also going to square negative 8. So then this simplifies to x plus 3, since the square root of x plus 3 squared is just x plus 3 because it's just one binomial. And then we do the square root of negative 8, which would just be plus or minus 8i. And the reason we do 8i is because you can't square root a negative number. And then our final step is just to isolate x, so then we would just do that by subtracting 3 from both sides, and we would get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 8i, and that is your final answer. Since in the problem we cannot square root a negative number and then we get 8i, 8i is actually a term we use and it's called an imaginary number. Oh my god, okay, this is our last equation. Our last equation. Our last equation is x squared plus 14x plus 6 equals 20.
Not 0. 20.
20, yes. So our first step is to separate our constants. So the way we're going to do that is subtract 6 to both sides, and then we're going to get x squared plus 14x equals 14. Okay, so our next step is to find c, and in order to find c, we're going to take b, which is our 14, and we're going to divide it by 2 and then square it. So then it's going to be c equals parentheses, and we're going to do 14 divided by 2 squared. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. So then we get 7, and then we square it. So now 7 squared is 49, so c equals 49. Now we're going to take our new number and add it to both sides of the equation. So now we're going to have x squared plus 14x plus our new number, which is 49. So plus 49 equals 14 plus 49. Now we're going to factor the perfect squared trinomial, which would be x plus b divided by 2 squared. So we're going to do x plus b, which is 14 again, divided by 2, and then square it. So our b is actually 14. So when we simplify this, it'll be x plus 14 divided by 2 is 7. So 7, and then square that. Now we're going to set this equal to the sum of 14 plus 49, which is 63. So our equation will actually be x plus 7 squared equals 63. Now we're going to solve for x by using a square root method. So we're going to take the square root of x plus 7 squared and the square root of 63, and that will be x plus 7, and we're going to drop the parentheses since we only have one binomial, and then we do x plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 63. And we can't forget the plus or minus because we're square rooting a variable. Now we subtract 7 from both sides to get x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 63. And that is our final answer!